Welcome, Dr. James Beckett, Sports Card Insights. I'm titling this 7 Friendly Rebuttals. I've listened to other podcasts, and I've realized as we get to the new year of 2026, my strategy toward the end of 2025 was to have discussions with people about sensitive topics. And now I'm realizing that when I hear conversations, I don't need to jump into their platform or bring somebody into my platform as much as just address the issue that comes up to give it sometimes a different perspective. Society is not much different than our microcosm of the hobby of the industry, that people hang out with people that agree with them. So when you discuss things, you agree with each other and can get on a roll. And if I'm in the conversation, I'm going to say, wait a minute, but then the conversation can go in lots of different directions. So I'm realizing that if I just am putting out my own content, then people can respond to me and we can have a further conversation. At least I can get my thoughts out there without interruption or somebody misinterpreting it. I shouldn't be shocked that people can misinterpret. They don't necessarily listen to what you're saying as much as they listen to what they think you're saying. I think it's going to be simpler if I just address some of these things unilaterally on my own. And they're friendly. I'm not angry about anything. It's just that when I hear things stated as either fact or this is what everybody believes, there are other ways to look at it. So I want to thank my sponsors, Topps, Panini, Upper Deck, Heritage Auctions, Hug the Scott Auctions, Mike Stadium Sports Cards, Burbank Sports Cards, ComC.com, and Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentication. As I've said, many of those now in 2026, new ownership, new structure, but it's still the same good reasons I had to sign up those sponsors back 6.5 years ago when I got started. Okay, here goes. Here are my 7 friendly rebuttals. First, I heard commentary, which I think seemed to be unanimous, that monopolies are always bad for the hobby. I just thought that's interesting. I think there are monopolies that are legal and monopolistic behavior that is illegal. And illegal monopolies need to be stopped. But there are other entities in the hobby in the past who have had a very large market share and have helped grow the hobby, starting off just with Topps. Now, you could have said Topps could have done better, but back in the day, they were the only game in town. They carried the ball, and they've got some great classic sets. During the period when they were the monopoly, like I said, they could have done better, but they didn't destroy the hobby. They didn't exploit the hobby. They just did what they did, and they carried the ball. Again, I don't think that's negative on them. I think competition has spurred them on to greater success. If you're in a business, you'd like to be a near monopoly. If you're a collector, you want lots of competition. I understand that. Another monopoly that was there when I got started was SCD, a near monopoly on mail order advertising. Did they exploit that? I think they just did great. They were an amazing competitor for us. And like I said, they had their lane. We had our lane. So they didn't monopolize magazines. They monopolized magazines that had a lot of mail order type ads in them. And so we did not compete directly with them. So then the next near monopoly was the Beckett Baseball Card Monthly, which was only, again, a monopoly in the sense of the way we defined it, to have a price guide magazine that looked nice. We had a very large market share. It doesn't mean we're the only ones, and we did not rest on our laurels. We kept trying to produce an excellent product. During my regime, we did raise prices, but it was reluctant. We really wanted to have a magazine that people could put in their hands and be proud of, that was not extra expensive, but we could have charged a lot more. And so we did not use that monopoly power to squeeze people. Then lastly, if you go back to the 90s, PSA had essentially a monopoly on grading before SGC got started, before BGS got started. And they didn't abuse that. They were the only game in town. But again, they rose to greater heights as SGC came along and then BGS, and they took the challenge, as BGS in the early 2000s was considered by many the top grading service. And even then, I think PSA still had a dominant market share. I think they always graded more cards than BGS did and SGC probably together. So again, monopolies are not always bad. Illegal monopolies are always bad, where they take advantage of the customer. And so those are some examples where that didn't happen. So again, friendly rebuttal. Number 2, I think when I've talked last year toward the end about market manipulation and shill bidding in particular, the conversation has gotten twisted, and I think I contributed to that there's this thought that market manipulation and shill bidding in particular are relationally oriented. In other words, you're helping out your friend, or you're bidding on your friend's card, you're bidding on your own cards. There's a relationship there that can be discovered, and that would be proof that you're manipulating the market with your friend. But I just want to go on the record of saying I think most market manipulation, and shill bidding as a good example of that. Again, there's lots of market manipulation going on with fixed price of activities that are not in the auction environment at all. But I think most of what's going on is tactical. You don't need to know the other person. As I've said, some conspiracies are symphonic, where you've got a group of people playing off the same sheet music, but most of them are like jazz, where they're just playing along. Everybody sees where this is going. And so I believe that most of the market manipulation is tactical rather than relational. And it's a distraction to worry. Again, eBay, the main thing they can do as being the leader in the auction space is look at the relational. Are the bidders related to the consigners, the sellers and the buyers? Is there 1 degree of separation there? That's happening, but I think the larger part of the problem is tactical, where people have realized they can strategically make bids, sometimes reneging, sometimes stopping short of winning, but there's a real tactical approach that is in no way related to the seller or consigner of the item. They just have their own strategy for doing that. I don't think that's been brought up. Number 3, when I hear that people send in cards to BGS or PSA, but let's pick on PSA right now. Just say that you get a 9 and you get it back, and we know this happens, and then you send it back in because you want to get a 10. And you pay the money to send it back in and get a 10, and you don't get a 10, you get a 9. And then you send it back in. And I just heard these stories of people sending in 10 times to get a 10. They're going to send it this 9 10 different times to try to get a 10. And on the 10th time, they get a 10. So to the people I'm listening to now are saying that's evidence that grading is a sham or crooked or flawed and or inconsistent. But there's another way to look at that. And having been a founder of a grading company is that if a card is sent in 10 times and 9 out of 10 times it's a 9 and 1 out of 10 it's a 10, then there's a lot of consistency there. Now, the problem is that it ends up being a 10 and then nobody's going to submit it anymore. The issue there not being considered is that when that 9 comes back the first time, you look at it, if you're the submitter, and you say, gosh, I just think that's a 10. And so you crack it out, because that's the best way you get reconsideration is break it out. And then maybe you just put a microfiber cloth on it, or you just kind of look at it and you think, this really looks like a 10. You send it back in. You still get a 9. It comes back. You crack it out again. And you say, you know what? Some of the times you're going to say, I guess there just is something there that they can't see. Now, again, if you're with BGS, you're getting a report card and you can say it's being downgraded for the corners. Unethical, but people are doing this. I've got to figure out a way to fix that corner or fix the edge or the surface. And centering, you can't fix it without trimming, which is a huge no-no. I'm just saying this is what's happening. So my point is, if you send it in 10 times, it's because you believe to the 10th degree that this really is a 10. And the people doing that possibly and likely are trying to improve the card as it goes back out there. So to say it's the same card when it was submitted the first time as opposed to submitted the 10th time, it's not a worse card. It might be a better card. It could be Kurt's Card Care. I don't know what it would be, but I don't see it as an indictment of the grading company that they graded it 9 times as a 9. And then the same card. It may not be the same card. It may be an improved version of the same card that finally gets a 10. So that would be an explanation for that. Fourth, there was a notable example of a raw card review that came back as a 5.5 and then later submitted to the same company, my former company, and it got a 9.5. And that is somehow evidence of incompetence or impropriety, whatever that would be. And I could just say it's very likely that is not the case. That when something got a 5.5, raw card review is a more cursory service that is not as detailed. And generally, there's no slabbing machine there. So that's the best you can do. That was an interesting development that was invented in our company. And I think was a valuable service when you didn't have a slabbing machine there. So if it's a 5.5, it looked like a 5.5. And so then it was put on the tamper-proof tape. And then the person can look at it and say, gosh, that looks a lot better than a 5.5 to me. I'm going to submit it as many of the rock hard review cards. They go in for full grading and full slabbing, and sometimes there's a discount that you've already had it preliminarily graded. Okay, so am I shocked that it would come back as a 9.5? No, that is very possible, and it doesn't have to be some terrible illegal thing. It might be there was something on the card that was noticeable when it was rock hard reviewed as a 5.5 that was not really on the card. It could have been some kind of a stain that really wasn't a stain. It could have been something that the grader could have brushed off, or could have fallen off a piece of dirt or some kind of a smudge. I don't think the graders make it a habit of removing smudges or tweaking corners or anything like that. But I think if they got it out of the rock hard review holder and looked at it and just ran their gloved finger over it and said, hey, there's nothing wrong with this card. This is a gem mint card. Yes, it's the same card, but it may not have been submitted in the same way, in that once you take it out of the rock hard review, there might have been something on there that was no longer on there. Some wax on the front, or something that looked like a crease but wasn't. Number 5, I'll name Jeremy Lee. He thinks the essence of shill bidding is everywhere. I absolutely do not think that. I still think people are not having a common definition of what is shill bidding, but the essence of shill is not everywhere. It's predictably in places where that game can be played. I'm in the dollar box because I think there's very little market manipulation of any kind, including any kind of shill bidding. Also, to Jeremy's great credit to promote eye appeal, I think there's less shill bidding when something is an eye appeal card, because it's harder to explain. I think commodity cards are where you're going to get more shill bidding, where something can bid it up, where these cards are fungible. I'm not saying that's all of it. I'm just saying the essence of shill is very remote on the low end of the market. On the very high end of the market, yes, I would be buyer beware of any card that's expensive. And people have a vested interest in wanting that price to go up higher. Number 6, I disagree. From my experience, I think I've contributed to getting reserves not met and bidding by the auction companies on behalf to get it up to the reserve. That's been part of the hobby discussion now. But reserves not met is a price. It's not a sale, but it's something that could have sold. If it's $1,000 reserve and the bidding doesn't get up to $1,000, don't tell me that card is worth more than $1,000. It was out there in a very public auction, available at $1,000, and nobody bid into it. Back in the day, back decades, those were considered in our price guide, certainly by me. When we went around and saw cards available at a price and we could verify there's nothing wrong with it, this is the card, then that has almost a floor on what the card is worth. If it's reserve not met at $1,000, don't tell me it's a $1,500 card. Now, a month later, it could be, but at that point, it's not. And then finally, there was some shock, I think, expressed that big dealers in particular had the audacity, and I think this was with reference to PSA, to push back when they got cards back. And this could be major auctions, major dealers, major collectors, known quantities within the hobby, that if they push back and say, hey, I got these grades back from you, PSA, I don't agree. These grades are too low. Okay. If there's some expression of shock that occurs, that's ignoring human nature. That happened all the time with every grading company. I know it happened with BGS, and it doesn't mean then you capitulate. And this happens a lot at card shows. You say, okay, let me take a look at that. Again, with BGS, you can say, oh, you can see here, it was corners, and look at this upper right corner, or look at it on the back. You didn't look on the back. And so that's the problem. But you don't capitulate if they say, hey, I got a PSA 9, I want a 10. Everybody wants a 10. All the grader has to do is say, here's the flaw. And if they can't find the flaw, then maybe they misgraded it between a 9 and a 10. But to think something's wrong with the system, the dealers are going to question the grades. Sometimes they're questioning the grades. And if the grading company is a pushover, which we certainly were not, and I don't think PSA is either, but if it's a big, great customer, they're not going to blow them off and say, hey, take a hike. They're going to give it consideration. Maybe we made a mistake. We'll take a look at it. And some of that, if it's a detailed review, I think that ought to be at a cost. But if it's a cursory review to say, okay, we'll run this back through. And my guess is a lot of times you'll get the same grade. These graders are not stupid. In my company, when people complain, this grade is too low, nobody says the grade is too high, but they did think cards were priced too high or priced too low. You just have to stand your ground and stand on the data and stand on your integrity. But if a mistake was made, I'm certainly not going to blow off a big customer. And I don't begrudge anybody that says, you know what, I think you're wrong on this one. And also tell me why. And if I'm wrong and you're right, I'm going to correct the mistake. I'm not going to blow you off. And so the fact that big dealers and the big auction houses in particular want to get great grades for their client, they want to get the best grades they can get. No problem with that. That is human nature. I certainly have no evidence that any of the BGS guys over the years were looking the other way. And I don't think PSA is either. That's the kind of thing that can spread like wildfire. That I complained, and even if they said, I complained and that they improved my grade. Yes, that's going to happen. But that probably is less often than you would think. But you're saying there's a chance. And so to complain, sometimes the re-review gets a higher grade. But I think a lot of times it gets the same. Just like the 10 times in a row you submit the 9 to try to get a 10. On the 10th try, you get it after you've improved it. In fact, you may have a whole bunch of cards that were like that. And we don't talk about the ones that got 9, 9, 9, 9, 9, and then you gave up because it really was a 9. So I think people are really hard on grading company policies and procedure they don't have firsthand knowledge about. Again, if there was a conspiracy, it would get out. So I can speak for my own company back in the day. Can't speak for PSA, even though they are the new owner of BGS. Anyway, thanks everybody. And thanks for the content creators out there that are giving a platform to some of these theories. But I just want to make sure they're fully discussed with different angles of how to look at things. So thank you everybody, and be back again in a couple days.